And of course, that also, and this may be where we can talk about his family life a little bit. I mean, first of all, that first son was an illegitimate son. So William, the first son and the one who becomes, he manages, brings into his family, his sort of real family with Deborah, treats him as a real person. In that sense, he's a decent human being. He didn't abandon the child he sired out of wedlock. But of course, that child then emerges as a strong supporter of the crown. And you have this really brutal conflict between father and son, which in many ways, to be honest with you, it's the one thing that's really shocking to me about Franklin was that he refused in the end, even though his son obviously followed the crown out of principle. He had his views. But after it all went down, after the actual revolution happened, and the son reached out to the father and said, look, we've had these differences. Can we patch them up? And Franklin said no. That his attachment to family was sort of strange in a way, because he seemed both devoted to it, but then abandoned his wife for long years at a time. He didn't even get to her funeral. And he was also, let's say, a bit of a swinger, it seemed. Again, this is another interesting thing about him. He was not a stranger to the lascivious pursuits, let me say. What do we really know about his philandering and his mischief?
Well, he certainly took on a lot of what he called his mistresses, two of them in Paris after his wife had died. He plays chess in the bathtub with Madame Briand. One of my favorite lines is Franklin is 80, nearing 80 at that point, and he has a friend, Cunedon, who's about to turn 90, and Madame Briand walks into a room in, I think, what's described as a state of déshabille, meaning not quite dressed. And Cunedon turns to Franklin and says, to be 70 again. So Franklin was not, the thing that you put your finger on, and we biographers have to deal with, is all humans are human. In other words, Franklin's no saint. He is a very difficult family person. He's devoted to his common-law wife, Deborah, in Philadelphia. They couldn't get married because she had been abandoned by a previous husband, and it was complicated. But he also then leaves to go to London, and she stays in Philadelphia. And worse yet is the story of William Franklin, the illegitimate son, devoted to his father. And I've always thought somebody should just make a movie of this, because when they go to England, William has his own illegitimate son, Temple. But unlike Benjamin Franklin, William doesn't take responsibility for Temple. But Benjamin Franklin does, eventually brings Temple into Ben Franklin's household in London, but alienates him to some extent from William Franklin. So you have a grandfather-grandson bond. These are all very difficult things, and it would have been great if at the end of my book and the end of the life, they had met in Southampton, where they went. Franklin was sailing home from Paris, having secured the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. He stops in Southampton to see William. If they had had a great reconciliation, the book would have been more heartwarming. But they don't. They don't.
It's as if something happened in that revolution. I mean, something definitely happened in that cockpit with Franklin, in which and when he returns, of course, the other peers are a little suspicious of him, because he was in Britain for a very long time. He knows all the London people. He's familiar with the court. He's got all these connections. He's very much his own man, and they don't trust at first, right, that he really was an American, but he was. He really had shifted. Yeah. Go on.
This is when he comes back in, I think, either late 1775 or very early 1776, from having failed to stop the revolution from occurring. It's already begun at Lexington and Concord. But you have to remember, even after Lexington and Concord, most Americans were not necessarily in favor of breaking from the British Crown. I mean, there were no polls back then, but I think the estimates are it was kind of split, half and half. And people were waiting to see which side Franklin was going to come down on. And what does he do? After he gets back to Philadelphia, he doesn't say a word. People like Adams and others are, which side is Franklin on? Which side is Franklin going to be on? He goes to a house in New Jersey, Trevose, where he meets his son William, who's then the royal governor of New Jersey, an employee of the king, and tells his son William that he's going to break, that he, Benjamin Franklin, is going to break with the king and declare his lot in favor of the revolution. And he asks William to resign and to join the cause of revolution. And William says no. And so this is why this rift, I think it could have been repairable, but it ends up being irreparable.